All right. Hello, today is Wednesday, April 16th. Welcome to episode 440 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller. I'm joined today by NSI Advisory Board Member Lester Munson, NSI Senior Fellow Andy Kaiser, and NSI Fellow Jessica Jones. Today, we're talking Iran. Since returning to office, President Trump has made clear that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. In early March, he sent a personal letter to Iran's supreme leader outlining a negotiating position that departed sharply from previous U.S. policy. The message was any new agreement must require the full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program and end to uranium enrichment, and a halt to support for terrorist proxies. It also came with a warning that there will be military consequences, that military consequences were on the table if Iran failed to comply. So leading this effort is Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy for Middle East negotiations, among other important tasks. He's been tasked not only with Iran, but initiatives with relation to Gaza and Ukraine and Russia. On April 12th, he met with Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, in Oman for the first direct U.S.-Iran contact since 2018. The talks, while largely mediated by Oman, were described on both sides as constructive, focused narrowly on nuclear issues. Iran, however, has continued enriching uranium at 60% purity, well above civilian levels. This week, Steve Witkoff went on Fox News and said that the United States might accept Iran enriching uranium up to 3.67%, exactly the JCPOA standard, a deal that has been deeply criticized by President Trump himself. Many saw this as a retreat from Trump's prior rejection. And then early Tuesday morning, Witkoff reversed course. So is this, I think the question is this strategic recalibration or a signal of mixed messaging at the highest levels? Lester, let's start with you.
Martha, I'm not really sure what to make of this. It seems like amateur hour. These were some pretty foreseeable issues and mistakes. It seems like they weren't really thinking before they went into these negotiations in Oman. And it kind of makes you wonder what the real goal of President Trump is. I think he's trying to be pushing on a whole bunch of issues all at the same time. It's kind of the U.S. government version of Everything Everywhere All at Once, that crazy movie from a couple of years ago. And he's really just trying to just kind of throw everything up on the wall and see what sticks. This is not going to work with the Iranians. The Iranians are, for whatever we think of their foreign policy, which is atrocious and a disaster and a big problem for the United States, they're pretty good at negotiating with Washington. And they ran the table on President Obama 10 years ago. They're getting ready to run the table on President Trump. And yes, there was a little bit of a pivot by Witkoff yesterday towards a better position on enrichment levels and that kind of thing. But I have zero faith that we're pointed in the right direction on negotiations with Iran. There really does need to be a shift here. And I think maybe let's drop the talks for now and just focus on the maximum pressure campaign. Iran is on its back foot. Israel has done a great job of targeting pretty much all of their proxy forces in the region, with the possible exception of the Houthis, where the U.S. has stepped up its attacks. Maybe let's focus on that for the next few months and kind of recalibrate where we are on these negotiations, because boy, that was a terrible start.
Jess, you I know have some thoughts on Iran's situation. Lester just described some of that. Would you like to delve into, is Iran in a strong position, or is this actually the perfect moment for maximum pressure?
So I agree, with Les in that, I'd like to call these negotiation tactics that we're seeing from Witkoff, but as Les shaking his head and raising his eyebrows, I think we can agree that's not what's happening. I mean, did Witkoff not, Are there not discussions on these details? These are important. These aren't even details, actually. These are the basic, parameters of an agreement. So as much as I'd like to think about unpredictability as a strategy, it doesn't seem strategic. It seems as if there's not been discussion on these important matters, and Witkoff is just kind of sent to begin, more for headlines and these kind of short-term messaging wins, which we've seen, and across a number of foreign policy issues, whether that's Ukraine and the ceasefire that we've been talking about now for a few weeks. But in reality, we now see Chinese troops being, used by the Russians. We see Russia conscripting more troops. Even Greenland, right? A lot of discussion about Arctic security and Russian and Chinese influence. And we've got J.D. Vance traveling there. But has there been any, productive move forward on how we're going to secure interests there? Not really. Same on tariffs, right? People are ripping us off. Great headline, but basically stalling, reversing, a lot of U-turns happening across many of these important issues. But, to your question and Leslie's point, this is, the timing, there is an opportunity. Iran is on its back foot. It is vulnerable. Its air defense systems have been obliterated. I think they might start to worry. There's been kind of a change of narrative when it comes to the U.S.-Russian relationship. President Trump has tried to tout his relationship with Vladimir Putin, and Russia is one of, Iran's stalwart supporters, right? That's where it gets most of its defense support. And so I'm sure they're not looking very keenly as the US and Russia potentially become a little bit closer. What does that do to their Iran and Russia strategic relationship, right? Not to say that Russia won't continue to support Iran. So there is an opportunity, but I don't think Witkoff has the maybe diplomatic chops or the backing to actually succeed in some of these engagements, as we've seen. So whether or not he gets now tasked with Gaza, going back, returning, whether, what he's up to next on like this dim sum wheel of issues. I that's what first came to mind, Les. I haven't had breakfast yet. Food. Whether he's able to actually take advantage of this opportunity, or whether, to Les's point, we need to continue maximum pressure and, try to the Trump administration nail down the parameters of what success would look like.
So, Andy, where do you, Jess has just outlined, there's been a lot of confusion. It seems like there's been a lot of bold moves right out of the gate in this administration. Where do you think the Trump administration will land with regard to this particular issue, or frankly, some of these other topics that Jess mentioned?
How long do we have, Martha? So, I do think it's clear, even from the first Trump administration, the president likes to have competing voices in the room. He's always had that. He certainly has that this term. There are certainly people in that national security decision-making room who are very hawkish on Iran. Secretary Rubio, Mike Waltz, Pete Hegseth, even if you look at the Signal chat, was very forward-leaning in the Houthi strike, for example. And the president is certainly capable of coming to the right conclusion on key decisions, right? The Soleimani strike, this Houthi campaign in Yemen, which is not insignificant, and, sort of counter to the advice of his vice president, for example. So, likes to have competing voices in the room, but is capable of making the right call. And of course, he's hearing not just from the Israelis on the threat of a nuclear Iran, but from all of our Gulf and Arab allies, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, on down the line. So it's not just a U.S. and Israel concern. It's much bigger than that. And with this administration being much closer to the Gulf states than the Biden administration, I do think you'll see that coalescing around, some key red lines. My hunch is Mr. Witkoff got a stern talking to and, changed his messaging in the room.
Well, on that note, I say that's a wrap. So thank you so much to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for help producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, April 18th for another episode of Fault Lines, NSI's podcast to get you smart fast on the national security foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check us out, subscribe, like, and review.